My name is Mary. Currently, I am working from home and taking care of my father-in-law at his house. My father-in-law used to be a hard worker, but it seems that this has led to his back problems, and he often feels unwell now. My mother-in-law is getting older, and she couldn't support my ailing father-in-law, so my husband John suggested that we move in with his parents. Their house is a spacious one-story house that seems to have been around since my father-in-law's father's time. Maybe it's because they live in such a big house, but both my mother-in-law and John have quite an attitude. Like being a housewife, my mother-in-law says I can't live a commoner's life, and John, who doesn't earn much, claims I'm different from ordinary people. I can't deny that they're getting carried away, but they only talk big and do not do their fair share of housework, so I've let them be. It seems my father-in-law used to be the same way. However, now that he's unwell, he consulted me, saying he can't earn money for the house anymore. He knew how much money John was earning, but he could not discuss this with my mother-in-law and John, whose attitude did not change. Listening to my father-in-law's plea, I started to make efforts for the household. Even though I was a caregiver, I was only able to support my father-in-law when he woke up, which I could do as I was working at home. My mother-in-law pushed me to take care of him while she did her own housework and went out with friends in the neighborhood, the same activities she was doing before my father-in-law's illness. "I'm sorry, Mary. I wish I hadn't had these work problems," my father-in-law said. "You've done nothing wrong. You've worked hard all your life, so please take a rest now," I reassured him. My father-in-law smiled at me with a look of relief after hearing my words. However, perhaps due to the toll of his previous hardships, his health deteriorated rapidly. Shockingly, when we had him checked at the hospital, they found cancer. Both my father-in-law and I were deeply shocked by the news. When my mother-in-law and John heard about the cancer, they were taken aback and expressed their concerns for him. How much time does he have left? How much will the treatment cost? Both my mother-in-law and John had many questions for him. It was surprising to me that they suddenly wanted to talk to him, considering they had not interacted much with him after his health declined. One day, when John was at work and my mother-in-law was out with neighbors, my father-in-law confided in me. They asked me about the time I have left and the cost of my treatment, because I'm sure they are thinking of the properties I will leave for them. How much of a legacy will I leave to those two? Those two will be thinking only of that and will try to flirt with me until I'm gone. Because of this, you might face difficulties, Mary, but remember, I'm on your side. Thank you for not abandoning our family. I replied, just as my father-in-law had mentioned. John and my mother-in-law started to make snide remarks. Perhaps finding it inconvenient that I spent so much time with him at dinner, she asked John, "Have you ever wondered why she's always here, not doing housework or anything?" He sighed, "I don't know. Mary quit her job without telling me and just lounges around at home. It's so frustrating. Maybe she came to this house with an eye on Dad." Since I carried my father-in-law's meals to his room, only John, my mother-in-law, and I dined in the living room. In a setting where no one defended me, the two of them continually berated me. "I do work, you know." "What are you talking about? You haven't stepped outside since you came here." "Stop lying. You haven't earned a single cent. Do you know why we can live this good life? It's because John works outside. You just lay around at home all day." Both of them criticized me without even knowing what I was actually doing at home, thinking that I would just get more complaints if I continued eating with them. I tried to bring the meal to my father-in-law's room, however. My mother-in-law snatched the tray from my hands. "There's no way I'm letting a gold digger like you serve food to my husband." "I'll take it." I had been preparing meals, considering my father-in-law's request and nutrition, but my mother-in-law never complained during the cooking process. She only wanted to be the one to deliver the finished meal. Her cunning and blatant tactics left me disillusioned. Not wanting to cause trouble for my father-in-law, I simply told her, "Please go ahead," and let her serve the meal. My mother-in-law and John tried to keep me away from my father-in-law, even when he was hospitalized. They wouldn't allow me to visit him. However, I was still in touch with my father-in-law via my smartphone. I suspect that my mother-in-law and John, fearing that I might inherit some of the estate for taking care of my father-in-law, were feeding him lies about me. Though they were the ones keeping me away, I heard they were claiming I refused to take care of my father-in-law. It seems my father-in-law was just nodding along and ignoring their tales. I nearly burst into laughter when I received messages like theirs, saying, "You ran away with the household money," and they were discussing the possibility of divorce in front of me. John has not brought up divorce to me, and for some reason, neither of them has tried to kick me out of the house. Perhaps they want to keep an eye on me since my father-in-law and I were close. If they kicked me out, they would lose control over my actions and probably suspected I would visit him in the hospital. Indeed, if I were to divorce John and be kicked out of the house, there would be nothing to stop me from visiting the man who had been kind to me. It made me realize that John and my mother-in-law really knew me well. And so, even as I faced harsh words from my mother-in-law and John, I walked from home and kept in touch with my father-in-law. However, 6 months later, my father-in-law passed away. While preparing for a funeral, I had to put my grief aside and get to work. Neither my mother-in-law nor John were particularly active during the funeral preparations, so I proceeded with the funeral as my father-in-law had asked me to when he was alive. The incident happened 1 week after the funeral while working on my computer at home. My mother-in-law and John suddenly entered the room I was using. It was unusual for them to barge into my room like that, so I quickly shut my computer and turned to face them. "What's going on? Don't you understand what you've done? I know you've been using your money. How dare you accept money from my husband? You really are a sly vixen." My mother-in-law's accusations left me stunned. I had no idea what my mother-in-law was talking about. I have never received money from my father-in-law. What in the world could have caused this misunderstanding? I was puzzled. Now John glared at me. "Let me discuss. You took advantage of your youth to cozy up to my dad and get money from him, right? It's sickening that my own wife would do that. I wish he wouldn't have such disgusting delusions." John's words cut deep. "I never did anything like that. This is some kind of misunderstanding." However, neither of them believed me. They began packing up my things, insisting I leave the house. "Wait a minute. You need to leave this house. Here's the divorce paper. Fill out your part and submit it right now." John handed me the papers. His tone was harsh and unforgiving. After being treated like this by the two of them, I had no intention of staying in the house any longer. Now that my father-in-law's funeral was over, I quickly signed the divorce papers. "I understand. I'll leave this house. I'll pack my things myself, so there's no need for you to help," I said firmly. After I said that, the two of them quickly left my room, probably not wanting to help. I sighed, gathered my things, and left. When I informed John and my mother-in-law that I had submitted the divorce papers, they both seemed to light up. The two of them will have a tough time ahead, so they might as well enjoy themselves now. Less than a month later, I received a call from John. I was at work, so I ignored it, but soon after, I received a message from him. "Hey, there's no money left in the house. You stole it, didn't you?" I had installed everything. My father-in-law never kept money in an easily accessible place, so they wouldn't find it just by searching the house. I think there will be a discussion about the money during the inheritance talks. He did respond to my message. It seemed he had completely forgotten about the inheritance discussions. Sometime later, I was informed there would be a meeting about the inheritance and was asked to come to my former in-law's house. It's funny to say my parents-in-law's house, since John and I have already divorced. Upon arrival, my mother-in-law, John, and another man in a suit were waiting in the living room. When the will was read, the faces of my mother-in-law and John turned pale. Most of my father-in-law's inheritance went to me. The house was left to my mother-in-law, and the remaining money went to John. Upon hearing the story, my mother-in-law exclaimed, "That's a lie. Why would this woman inherit most of the estate? The only family he had was me and John. She is nothing more than a stranger." As my mother-in-law lunged forward as if to grab the man in the suit, he looked surprised. "What did you tell my father? It's absurd that most of the inheritance would go to you." I had decided that after this I would cut ties with my mother-in-law and John. However, there was something I was curious about and wanted to ask. "By the way, why did you think I was receiving money from my father-in-law?" "Don't change the subject. I don't think we'll see each other again, so I thought I'd ask you some questions. Just tell me, will you?" My father mentioned it right before he passed away. He said, "Marry money every month." His words were slurred, but he definitely said it. "So you borrowed money from him every month, didn't you?" "It's the other way around." What I finally understood was why the mother-in-law and John had mistakenly thought I was borrowing money from my father-in-law instead of my father-in-law giving me money every month. I was the one giving him money, around $5,500 for living expenses. Wasn't he saying that I was giving him $5,500 every month? He was apologizing for having me pay him every month. What, $5,500 every month? Why were you paying living expenses? Because even after my father-in-law became unable to work, neither you nor the mother-in-law contributed any money to the household. I felt guilty living in a family home without contributing financially. But $5,500? The expenses for the large house and your mother's social expenses? You both try to live a luxurious life without earning any money. That's why the amount I pay monthly keeps increasing. But I did enjoy indulging in some luxuries like good food, so I stayed silent about it. The reason I never said anything to my mother-in-law and John before was because my father-in-law was on my side, and I was content with the good life we had. I also didn't expect to receive most of the inheritance from my father-in-law, so I was genuinely surprised. If the majority of the inheritance doesn't go to my mother-in-law and John, they probably won't be able to afford the maintenance of the house or their living expenses. How can you afford to pay $5,500 every month when you're unemployed? I told you I wasn't employed. I've been working from home. Didn't we discuss this before I moved into your family's home? Did we? It seems John had completely forgotten our conversation. I sighed in exasperation. The fact that John didn't remember means he probably never told the mother-in-law. That's probably why both of them thought I was employed. If I hadn't been working, I would have been idling away my time in the house, especially after my father-in-law was hospitalized. I'm not so shameless to live off someone else without doing anything. In that case, let's get back together. Excuse me. I tilted my head in confusion. The reason I wanted a divorce was that I thought you were unemployed. You heard about the divorce from me, and thinking I'd given up on you must have been devastated and signed the divorce papers. If you aren't unemployed, then I don't see a reason to divorce anymore. What are you talking about? You still love me, right? You must have been devastated about the idea of divorcing me, since I'm offering to cancel the divorce. You should come back home. Don't mess with me. Why should I have to take care of you both? Your father was kind to me, so I stayed in this house to repay his kindness. But when it comes to you and your mother, there's no love and affection left. Always making fun of me and being sarcastic. How am I supposed to keep paying for people like that? Wait, you don't love me anymore. Of course I don't. Any affection I had is long gone. John looked more shocked than I had ever seen him. He must have genuinely believed I didn't despise him, even after he constantly teamed up with his mother to belittle me. If he thinks that won't make me dislike him, he is mistaken. I let out a heavy sigh. The mother-in-law, on the other hand, looked awfully dejected as a man in a suit explained to her the evident fact that no money was coming their way. "You and your mother will have to fend for yourselves from now on. I am not going to pay for you two anymore, and just to let you know, with your monthly salary of $2,000, you won't be able to maintain your current lifestyle." What I never considered was renouncing my claim to the inheritance for John and his mother's sake. I'm not that naive. I cut ties with them and headed home. I didn't intend to have any more dealings with John and his mother, so I blocked their contacts and even got a new phone. And since we've divorced, neither of them knew my new address. Some time passed, and I heard that John and his mother had visited my parents' home. I was surprised because I never expected them to confront my family, living so far away from what my mother taught me. John and his mother seemed to think I was living at my parents' house. They shouted, "Bring Mary out now. Even if he divorced Mary, she is still my wife. Oh, my wife's money is mine. I'll never forgive Mary for running away with what's mine. If you're hiding her, we won't spare even her parents." It seemed that outside my family home, John, along with his mother, was yelling such threats. My parents, out of fear, didn't open the door and immediately called the police. Shockingly, John and his mother apparently injured a responding police officer and were taken into custody before they could harm my parents. Upon asking more about the deal, it appears they had sold the spacious house they had always lived in and began residing in a rundown apartment. Yet, unable to adapt to a lower standard of living and facing a lack of funds daily, they've resorted to stealing beef from the nearby supermarket. Neither seemed to have the intention to earn money, but were inclined towards criminal activities, which gave me chills. It seems they are currently in jail. I'll be bothered if they become fixated on me once they're released, so I informed those around me about the two, ensuring that no information about me would leak. My parents told me that they are leaving the family home where they now live to start a rural lifestyle, and they have been thinking about it for some time. So they will no longer be assaulted by the duo again. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Retaliation Realm channel.